Hey everyone, this is Toni Holbein. You are listening to the Revenue Formula. In today's episode, we're talking to Koen Stam again from Personio, and we're focusing on your terrible 2026 plans. Instead of adding more layers to your go-to-market, we're talking about that you need to make what you've already built better. And now, enjoy the show.
How are you going to nail next year? And then typically what you hear is like, hey, let's go up market. Let's add a new product. We are very good in our home country. Let's add that new country. People have the tendency to always think about new initiative and new programs.
People continuously underestimate the additional complexity that comes from executing well on those multiple layers that you kind of, smear on top and smear on top and smear on top, right?
But the moment you're going to pull resources from what I would call your current or your core functioning go-to-market programs, motions, initiatives, if you pull them away and you put them on the new bed, something will happen with your current, like your revenue bucket, which actually is very predictable. So maybe you put all your efforts in that new play, but then your core layer, which is actually really predictable because that's as shown, starts to get a little bit shaky.
We have here today with us Koen again, Koen from wonderful Amsterdam. Currently today calling from the office, right? From the shop.
From a rainy, gray Amsterdam. Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, there you go. Koen, so before we jumped on this call, you just told me that you came out of a planning session with, was it 6 different leaders, and you're going through all the different details and tweaking all the different things. And you said you were extremely excited about it. Tell me more about that before we jump in.
I mean, every leader, especially when we are right now, like in Q4, you want to focus on getting your year done, right? Like, and it's always this balance between short and long term. And I think it is so important to still spend significant time understanding where you can land for next year and really making sure for the different teams and how you're cross-collaborative working that the plan is in place and the plan is attainable. Because I think that's like a really, really important element where so many companies have gone wrong the last couple of years. But again, I don't have to tell you, like also I've been like a revenue leader in so many companies, that balancing between, hey, we need to nail the current Q4 when it comes to your close one. You still want to build a decent pipeline because Q1, I mean, you also need to start a year in the right pace. And then planning for the entire next year. I mean, that balance on itself, it asks a lot from leaders, but I think as well, like from, again, like for myself as a more senior leader, but I think as well from the first line leaders. And one thing which I really liked, I don't know how you did it in the past, but like, I think there's always this question to what extent top down and bottom up. But I think what we did this year ourselves, where I really like that model, even though it cost myself also a lot of time, is like really involving like this bottom up. So our first line leaders, our second line leaders, our third line leaders, and then like our top leaders, like from a CRO perspective, Shantanu from senior director of revenue, up to like the CEO in this case and CFO. But like everyone is involved in the planning. Everyone can have his say. So eventually you really become part of this plan. I think it's really time consuming a lot. And therefore also I just came out of a meeting on the Friday in the afternoon. And I typically say Friday afternoons, you should not like have these kind of like meetings when it comes to deep into numbers on the Friday afternoon. Just like the same, like hiring for new interviews. If I would do an interview, I would never do that on a Friday afternoon because you're typically cooked. But again, it's so important. So yeah, it was an interesting exercise.
I think it's really difficult to balance this out, honestly, because it's so easy to start the next year on the back foot and just be behind the whole year. If you don't already prepare, like that's terrible. But also, I've seen this myself, like not only frontline, but also myself. It's like, you know what? 99% of my focus is on landing Q4. It's really difficult to squeeze all the rest into the 1%, right?
Yeah.
But since we're on the topic of looking into the future and planning, we're not going to talk about planning here today, by the way. Now, everyone that's still with us that, has like, nope, not Toni and planning today. We're actually not going to talk about that. But I think what's really interesting and we want to talk about is how to tackle, I think what we're all seeing, sometimes I refer to it as the great pipeline starvation. Some people call it the GTM slowdown. everyone is finding their own little buzzword around this, right? And you can see it in a negative way, and it's like, ooh, everything is more difficult, or you can see it in a positive way, and it's like, hey, let's be better in the future. Let's push. Let's push harder. Let's drive faster. Let's kind of get this thing done. And really kind of how to achieve that and kind of think about this for next year. That's actually what we wanted to talk about here today, Koen.
Which is also very important, because you can plan, but if you don't know what you need to enable or do better, do more, or need to initiate, then we also never get towards our growth ambition as a company. So no, and that's also, I think, a very important one. And just getting back towards our conversation of Q4, yes, you are so much focused on the balance of, okay, how are we going to end Q4? But Q4 will be over, and on the 1st or the 2nd of January, when we start over again, we are at zero again. So we need to have our plans in place. And for all of our companies who have growth ambitions, and we still have growth ambitions because the number one driver is still top line growth, we need to understand where are we going to put the focus? What are we going to do new? What are we going to do better? Maybe what we're going to stop. And then you really talk about the go-to-market programs, the initiatives.
So let's jump into that. And this is obviously disconnected from Personio, right? So this is not a chat about what you guys are doing at Personio. I think we're talking a little bit more generalistic about the whole thing. What is it that you're hearing and seeing? Kind of what is the standard reply when someone says like, ooh, next year we need to grow more? What is everyone currently saying? What's the, quote unquote old playbook of everyone?
I think it's always logical for any of us, whether it's yourself or if you ask me this question, or I ask anyone in the room, also other go-to-market leaders, how are you going to nail next year? And then typically what you hear is like, hey, let's go up market. Let's add a new product. Let's maybe consider, we are very good in our own country, let's add that new country, or let's add this extra piece of, hey, we need more pipeline. And we are quite good on the inbound. Let's start with outbound. Like there are all these kind of motions or go-to-market initiatives, which are, and I always say, net new added in terms of programs. I think that's the normal response. If you ask, what will you do next? People have the tendency to always think about new initiative and new programs. Yes. And that's, I think, really logical.
And I think this, I call this the layered approach. I've been subject to this myself. We were going through, selling the company, and then people wanted to see how we're going to hit a certain, revenue goal. Mm-hmm. And the easiest way to explain to them is by giving them that layered approach, right? So, hey, we have this channel working on right now. It's going to produce so much. And instead of having really difficult conversation with them, doesn't matter if it's in a sales, you selling the company or you selling your plan to the CEO. It doesn't matter which scenario you pick, but it somewhat always seems so more logical and simple to say, or to argue a case by saying we're going to do another layer and another layer and another layer. And then we have a layer cake, and that layer cake is going to be bigger and bigger, right? I think this is where this is coming from. I think kind of if you go through each layer by itself, it feels very comfy to kind of assume like, oh, we can probably get another million from here. We can probably get another couple of million from here, right?
I think it comes down, Tony, there as well, like towards this exercise which we're doing. Hey, we already have 10 mil. If we do another product, another market, extra SDR, hey, that has capacity, that has coverage. Okay, we can add another 1 million there. We can, this actually chimes up from 10 and we can be end of year at 15 million by adding those layers. And of course, in a theoretical model on itself, if everything works as intended in your spreadsheet, with all respect there, but that's, and I've been there and done that, right? It's like I've done that multiple times, always thinking like, hey, adding those layers and those add that revenue components, there you have the plan.
And maybe, for people that, watch this on YouTube, we can plug the show that we did with you and Shantanu, I think a month or so ago. We did also talk about basically kind of the complexity that's creeping up. And the complexity is really the weight that's pulling you back, the friction that's coming, that you are in your planning motion, you're kind of happily and conveniently unaware of, right? You kind of know like, oof, this enterprise thing is probably going to be difficult. I kind of theoretically know a long sales cycle, and so I need the SOC 2 thing, maybe some product features. But hey, we can all get this done. We can all get, this is no problem. We can put $1 million for this in, right? And then obviously when reality hits and you actually need to execute this, you realize how much more difficult this actually was than what you kind of planned before, right? And I really think people continuously underestimate the additional complexity that comes from executing well, like not just executing,
Yep.
but executing well that produces outcomes on those multiple layers that you kind of, you know, smear on top and smear on top and smear on top, right? Would you agree? Is that the main thing? Do you see another thing that people are kind of turning a blind eye to that is basically kind of ruining this whole layer cake idea?
Yeah, because and do you think you can add those layers, but indeed, in order to get that piece of additional revenue which you put in your spreadsheet, you need to execute that additional layer well. And I think as well, like what we tend to forget is actually two components, cost and people. First, cost, like investment. Do we actually have the budget in order to facilitate that extra move, whether this is a big marketing campaign, hiring this extra SDR, going up marketing, just put your bets on a new AE who will be proven with a big logo company to sell enterprise, and you're going to start with that person. I'm adding new product, and indeed, like all those costs involved to get there. Do we have those budgets? Right? That's like one thing. Then a second thing is, wait, who is going to do this? The moment, and then you can have like a layer cake, but the moment you're going to pull resources from what I would call your current or your core functioning go-to-market programs, motions, initiatives, if you pull them away and you put them on the new bed, something will happen with your current, like your revenue bucket, which actually is very predictable. So actually you pull that person out or persons, and it all of a sudden becomes a little more shaky. So maybe you put all your efforts in that new play, but then your core layer, which is actually really predictable because that's as shown, starts to get a little bit shaky.
I like that. I like that. Basically saying like, hey, you're taking that portion for granted, so to speak. Right? It's like, sure, yeah, that revenue is gonna come in, and we don't need our quote unquote best brains on that. We're gonna put them on the next thing. But actually, it doesn't work like that. Right? Kind of, even to get to this predictable outcome, you still need all the brain power that he had attributed, you know, previously, right? And I think, I think at the end of the day, I don't think we will change the, you know, hearts and minds of CEOs and CROs and kind of say like, you know what, we actually need to kind of do this differently. I think what we can achieve here today is for folks to at least give it, you know, a second thought. Like after they're kind of locked in on this enterprise thing, kind of give it a second thought whether or not that is the right next move, right? But let's move on to the, okay, so that's kind of the old way of doing it. It's just adding more stuff. What is the solution here from your perspective? Because you still need to grow more. I mean, you're a senior sales leader at Personio. They're not gonna go like, oh, you know what, Koen, that's right. Just do what you did last year. Stay flat, and we'll be happy. I don't think that's the answer. Right? Growth is still the paradigm that needs to be executed. So, how do you think about it? How do you think you can get growth these days? And maybe not doing the layer cake, exercise.
Yeah, I mean, ideally do both, right? Like, yeah, I mean, if you really want to grow, and again, it all depends on the maturity states of the company we are in. It all depends on how many people eventually working, how many capital you can deploy. Like, there are so many elements which actually decide like what you can do. But I think it's quite common that, especially the majority of companies are sub 20 or sub 10 or maybe even sub 5 million ARR. They don't have the money, they don't have the people, and therefore I think you need to dare to make choices. And I think the number one thing, whether you're a GTM operator, a leader, or a founder, it is so easy to think about net new initiatives, do more. But again, to the point of, do we have the monies to invest, and do we have the people to invest without jeopardizing something which works? I mean, that's of course on itself a very interesting and very important occasion and conversation you need to have. And so, hey, look at what may be on your side, what is currently already there, what potentially can work better. And I think that's how typically a lot of founders and GTM operators logically don't think. They think in, hey, you need to do more. People directly think, I need to add this +1 new logo more. But if you have revenue, I think it's important always to first understand where does the revenue come from. And then you always get to the Pareto rule, right? The 80-20. Like 80% of your revenue come from 20% of your customers. Who is that 20%? Do we truly understand the 20%? Same for all your marketing campaigns. We actually know that the majority of the pipeline, 80% of your pipeline comes for 20% of your marketing programs. Which are these programs that actually convert? What are the programs that don't convert? Maybe we can put that one down slightly when it comes to investments and people. And why not put like a little more oil on the fire of that program or the type of customer which we know converts better? And I think that on itself is not like a very new way of thinking, but in a way of we need to grow. The first lever is always on the new business side and new logo side. And I think, and I'm also curious to your view there, that's not the only way where we should look at for net new growth.
Before we get back to the conversation, a quick break. Most teams I talk to that are trying to scale, strategy is not the problem, it's almost always execution. They've got dashboards telling them what happened, but nothing that actually drives what to do next. That's why I've been watching what ZoomInfo is doing lately. They've completely rebuilt themselves. It's not just a contact data anymore. It's a full go-to-market intelligence platform that sees buyer signals and launches the motion automatically. Strategy turns into action and growth becomes predictable. Check it out at zoominfo.com/revenue-formula. So while you were talking about it like this, right, I was also reflecting on hey, there is a parallel to building products here too, right? And neither of us, nor you nor I, are product leaders or product builders necessarily. Kind of, yes, we have some experience in this, but I think that's not why people are listening. But I do think there's a little bit of this, the truth from building products. It's like, well, adding more features doesn't make your product better, right? There's, adding another slice on top that maybe unlocks one weirdo use case or weirdo audience might not actually make you a better business, better company. And you know what? The same thing is probably true for your go-to-market engine, right? Kind of, there are some of those physics, some of those rules that translate over. And instead of trying to build yet another, module and feature into your product, basically kind of transferring this over to your go-to-market engine, instead of doing that, just nail really well what you're already good at, right? And I think, while this might make theoretical sense for a bunch of people, like, oh yeah, cool, let's do that. Let me go back to my RevOps and CRO and be like, hey, we should just keep, doing more what's already working. Like let's define a little bit what that actually means. How can people find out what's working, what's not working? Kind of what is a good rule of thumb? Kind of, without people buying all kinds of analytics tools and hiring 5 GTM engineers or whatever. Like, how can people figure out and sense out where there is an opportunity to double down or triple down in the existing go-to-market that they're currently running?
Now, I know that you and me, I could really thinking the same way, because you used to have a beautiful tool for making that breakdown. And again, I think when founders, revenue leaders start to think, hey, next year we need to grow 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, or 100%, we need to grow 2x, they come up with anecdotal ideas how we can grow the business. And again, then it comes to like, let's add a new program, and everything needs to be backed with data. And then I hear young founders or revenue leaders say, yeah, but we are sub 2 million ARR, we don't have this data. If you have no data, it's going to be really damn difficult to make the right decisions. And of course, you can always make some assumptions, but eventually everything is backed with data. If you have like 1 million of ARR, that 1 million ARR comes from a type of ICP, comes from a type of channel, comes from a type of geography, purchase a type of your product offering. So we need to understand all those elements, and that's just basic go-to-market understanding. And of course, that comes down towards, hey, what is my entire customer journey? I mean, to that extent, it's always very easy to go to the story from Jacco from Winning by Design when it comes to the revenue factory and the production lines. Hey, what do we actually have? And you can break it down in all different kind of ways. You can break it down in your products, your offering. If you have, I don't know, for a Personio and HR and a payroll product, or as a Personio, and I just make the example for myself because of course I'm also now in planning. Hey, I have the UKI, I have the Benelux, and I have Spain. That's more on the geographically layer. Or hey, I have an SMB play and a mid-market play. And these are all product lines. And one thing what I myself, regardless of the stage of the company, is always doing and always will be doing is show me actually at least ideally the last 7 or 8 quarters, because then I have 2 years of data and I'm just trying to understand. And you can do this in Excel. It's not like, again, in any company I come. I mean, I think I've showed you once my my lovely Excels, how I do that myself. I want to understand actually where in the funnel what works. And you can go as deep as possible, but eventually from an MQL or an accept opportunity towards close one, towards renewal, just the entire customer journey, understand what works and what doesn't work. And again, getting back towards the example which we did earlier, is like, what works? Hey, how can we potentially generate some additional investments which we can put there? Because where something works, there's definitely stuff which doesn't work, and that you can stop, and you actually shift that type of budget towards the elements or your product line, your factory line, what works. And it sounds maybe a little bit like abstract, but again, it comes down to, do you actually understand where your new business revenue comes from? But I find it even more important if you are a few years around, and most of the companies, they are a few years around. How does the customers that renew and grow? How are we truly understanding what is that type of customer on really not only, that is that type of industry, because that on itself is not an ideal customer profile on ICP, but we truly need to understand what is that type of customer who actually keeps renewing and keeps growing with us, because that's an ideal customer. And if we reverse engineer that customer, I mean, I think that we already have like a big answer on where we potentially of not adding this extra layer on top, but hey, this actually works. And which channels actually convert this type of customer who renews already for several years.
Yeah.
Maybe we can do a slightly more there. And I think that's a really simple exercise, but nobody truly takes the time to make that visible in simply an Excel sheet.
I think there's a data exercise. I think there's a visibility exercise and all of that stuff. I also do think that for many of those decisions, there just isn't, either enough or any data at all.
Yeah.
And I think that's true for let's just say even you're like an established business, 10, 20, 30 million, maybe you're operating in the enterprise space. There's just not that super much data there, right? Because if you have a long delay between what you do and what you get, and then people struggle a little bit more with that, right? And I think then the other piece is also, I think, and this is more from my experience as having been now a founder for 3 to 4 years, is it does all start with the ICP. Like at the end of the day, it starts with the ideal customer profile. And and I think one good way that I would recommend people to try and figure this out is obviously look at your current customer base and try and figure out, based on a couple of criteria, who is like your best customer. And then figure out how to get more of those. It's really stupid, but basically that's what it is, right? And then think about, well, and this is where some of the problems kind of potentially theoretically come in. Like if you figure out that your one specific, best kind of customer is best reached through outbound, for example, but currently outbound stats are shit, that could still give you an indication that you maybe should be tripling down on outbound. Like just as an example, probably if you're outbounding to your ICP, probably your number's going to be great already. But it could be sometimes misleading only to rely on the data, right? So having a little bit of a wider net in terms of thinking about it with and without data, I think super important, right? And then the other thing is, and I think that's super healthy for people to just think about is think about it as the parking lot exercise. So what's the parking lot exercise? The parking lot exercise is you have everyone is in your company, and then from the one day to the next you fire everyone. Everyone is standing outside in the parking lot, and then you figure out and try and decide whom you want to hire back, right? And doing this not in a sense of adding more, but if you do this exercise, and to a degree, you have to do it in a forced rank fashion, right? Because you can't say, I'm going to hire those 5 people, back at the same time, or those 5 tactics back at the same. You will be like, oh no, this is probably like a must-have tactic, right? And I think if you force yourself to do this kind of exercise, you will probably realize and figure out, with and without data, there will be some gut in there, I'm sure, to figure out kind of what are the core pieces, and then honestly try and figure out how you can triple down on those core pieces. And how would you do that? Well, it might be that you do that with funds of the people that are still standing out there in the parking lot that you don't need anymore, right? And that could be closing down markets. It could be, shutting off different ICPs. It could be, hey, you know what? Hey, we have really this use case where we're competing in a market where there's clearly a winner, and we're just competing there to bother them. Instead, we could just stop that and focus on what we're really good at.
Yeah, I think, and I think your example there is right. Like, and if I put it in perspective, in one of my previous companies, I think we grew quite quickly in Europe, because there we saw like, hey, we were this was this Belgian company. We were selling like a CRM platform, specifically for agencies. So consulting companies and agencies. And we were very successful in Belgium. We were moderate successful in the Netherlands. And then we really started to scale quite quickly. Germany, France, Italy, Spain. Because we like, hey, if we can solve this specifically in those small countries in Europe, let's then expand towards those other countries. But yeah, again, to the point of like additional investments, additional people go into like those markets, we quite quickly learned that it's not that easy to scale in all those European countries simultaneously with the right focus, and eventually also, from a unit economics perspective, making it all profitable, or at least like significant when it comes to top line growth. And if you then think like, hey, but wait, what if these kind of investments you can allocate towards your core markets and put, to that extent, more oil on the fire? Wouldn't that make us eventually, not only in the short term, but also in the long term, higher growth in revenue overall? And I think the logical tendency of founders, of revenue leaders, is we want to be proud. We want to mention that we are in so many countries with so many people. And I think that's a bit like of the old 2020 playbook, or maybe even 2022, but like not the 2026 playbook. You don't have to do that. And I think one anecdote, I was with actually their main investor, I think 1.5 years ago. I went here in Amsterdam, not far away from where I'm now currently sitting. I went for lunch with one of the partners of that investment fund. And he also said like, hey, actually, when we look back on that journey, our tendency was always, if we want to grow, and it was just a VC, right, a venture capital, then we need to deploy capital so they can quickly expand in Europe. But eventually they learned, because they sold the company, is by focusing and doing less but better, we actually see that our multiple return for the company, for the founder, for the investors, was way better and way more predictable, and also way more fun, I think, eventually, just to execute, than like having this spread everywhere very thin. And again, and that's next towards ICP. I think you need to dare, as a founder, as a revenue leader, just to say no to certain areas. That doesn't say you need to pull back or you need to pull out, but you need to dare to make decisions on where we're going to focus and where we're not going to focus. And that's also for myself 3 years ago when I came here in Personio in the Benelux. Hey, you can do the Netherlands and Belgium. And even though they're both small countries, we said we are going to nail the Dutch market first. And we can do SMB and mid-market, we're going to do SMB first. And if that's really proven, let's then move on. Because then I think we can keep it stable and we can add this extra layer on the cake. But I think that's like the way we really need to think,
Yes.
especially 2026.
So I totally agree with that. I think there's some vanity in trying to add more stuff faster, and there's also some vanity in like saying we're selling to the enterprise. We have Coca-Cola, we have GM, we have Ford, or whatever. I'm not sure if Ford is on the list anymore, but there's some vanity in this, right? But besides doing the very abstract resource allocation game of less here, more there, you recently had a presentation somewhere in Amsterdam where basically we're talking about 5 things, like 5 specific tactics, I want to call it, right? That's a little bit detached from the typical, money allocation, business, but more like, hey, let's, what are we actually doing on the effing ground here? Let's jump into those actually. What is the first one you executed?
Now again, I come back to I think what we said, like you need to really understand your ICP. And an ICP needs to really well defined, because eventually, and that comes with cross collaborative working, is if you understand your ICP, we also as a founder, as a revenue leader, cross functional, we need to align. This is the customer, and from product onwards, because we are still like we are a product company, from a product onwards towards how we are building brand, how we are building top of funnel, how we are building eventually quality pipeline, how we are converting pipeline, how we are implementing, how we are adopting and eventually renewing this customer. We really need to understand how we can solve for that specific ICP. And just by really focusing and aligning, I think that there you will see that you will have a massive impact. And again, that exercise on itself, a lot of companies say that they do ICP, but yes, they did it once, 1.5 years ago, or they haven't done it really more than, I'm selling towards companies between 10 and 10,000 people in entire of Europe. Like, no, it really need to be specifically defined. I think that's like really number one key to define. That's for me number one.
And kind of jumping on this actually, like a very practical tip and advice for people here is, if you're selling in B2B, like the main difference between B2B and B2C is in B2B, you can literally have a list of all the people that you want to sell to. Like you can create a list. In B2C, forget about that. That's not going to work. But in B2B, that works, right? So if you can create that list, build that freaking list, and then actually make sure that both your sales team and your marketing team is operating on the same list. And, that is very easy on terms like the SDRs reaching out to those people, and ads are being targeted at those people and lookalikes and however you can define them. But whenever marketing is putting out, for example, content or doing some event, it's like, with that piece of content, whom on their list do we believe we can activate based on that, right? And you know what, that will be hard to prove and will be hard to follow up and measure and all of that stuff. But that needs to be still the starting thought, of the marketing team to achieve that, right? And frankly, beyond go-to-market, the same for product. Like those are the people we're building this for, not for these other people that we're kind of maybe seeing sometimes on the it's those folks, right? So that's, I feel, where this whole ICP tightening becomes more tangible for people, right?
Yeah, no, and 100%. And again, and to the point, because eventually I also really like to make things very tactical, because you can indeed, like you said, you can focus on your ICP, you can focus on like which markets are you going at or not, like, and really focus. But eventually, if you really want to get towards your growth for next year, all comes down towards pure execution. I think that's also what you were referring to. Like, and also there, when it comes to execution, I mean, typically I see that we as founders and revenue leaders make it way too complex when it comes to how do we improve win rates or pipeline or what have you. And eventually it always comes down towards pure fundamentals of trading. And again, like just to get a bit practical on those elements, which I also presented like 2 weeks ago, I think one of those key things is where we need to remember, even though you have ICP defined and you start targeting that person and that person starts to talk to yourself, we also need to imagine that that person, most 9 out of 10 times, have never bought software before, have never bought your specific solution before, or had never bought any kind of purchase within that company, because typically also the tenure in companies are relatively short. So, and if they don't have any of that knowledge, it's also us as sellers. We really need to enable those buyers, and like one of those tactics where I'm a really big fan of, and that I call this, it is called async selling, right? Like, is really, how can we make sure to enable the buyers which we are buying to, that eventually they can, if they really believe that you are the right solution, that they can sell this internally themselves. Because we always think when it comes to selling that we are selling. No, we are enabling, and eventually it is the person, eventually a fan or a champion, who actually needs to do the selling, most likely when you are not in the room, internally in that company, but they don't have this experience. And then if it really comes towards execution, we think, I have a call, and I have maybe I send an email, or I have otherwise the demo or other live calls where I can make all the difference. But if we know that 85 to 90% of the entire buying decision is happened without a live call or a live meeting where you show your beautiful product. So there are different ways where we really need to think about how we are influencing the buyer, how we are enabling the buyer. And that to me is like, I'm a really big fan of async communication and async tactics. And just to explain for anyone think like, hey, it sounds very fancy, but the moment you and me are not in a live call, or speaking on the phone, but sending an email, having contact over LinkedIn, over email, or maybe sending a video, like all those in-between moments, these are actually very crucial in order to have better execution. And I think when I speak to a lot of founders and leaders and also sellers, they're actually very poor in those execution moments. And there typically you really, and especially nowadays with digital sales rooms, I mean, I'm quite vocal on these kind of things. And for me, it's not the vendor, it's not the tooling. It is eventually, how do we make sure that we actually educate buyers in their buying cycle? Yes, you can do it on the website, but the moment they click on a demo, they actually are involved with yourself, with a solution engineer. It depends on the complexity of your product. With so many people, and all those people are sending all kind of pieces of information towards the buyer, who gets overwhelmed because they also have 4 or 5 competitors. And so I think that's like one key tactic where people really can focus on, if you ask me for next year, to do better execution. And I'm actually amazed that there are not that many who are so much focused on better execution in all the contact moments which you can have with the buyer.
So I love that, right? And again, right, this is not specific tool that needs to be bought and implemented. I think it's really just, thinking hard about what happens in the 98% of the times that I'm not sitting with the buyer, and really the selling and the sales cycle actually happens, right? Kind of obsessing over that. So when we were selling social media management software, we were selling that to the lowest person in the organization, because a social media manager, like, sometimes the intern right out of school, they could never buy any of that stuff. So what did we do? We kind of gave them a, sell this to your boss package, right? Because they always had to sell it to their boss. Right?
And they don't know how to sell. So you need to enable them.
and they also don't know how to buy, by the way. But like that is kind of the main thing, right? You kind of really need to actually help them and obsess over that. And well, what's going to happen? Sure, some uplift here and there, but you know what? You're probably going to close a couple of more deals, because of that, which basically, goes right into this. Don't do more, just do better, right?
Yeah.
What would you say is another example? I'm not sure if we're going to get through the whole list here today.
No,
but what's another example
and it's fine, because there are so many things, but they are closer towards us than we sometimes thinking. And again, on the angle of influencing the senior buyers, you and me as sellers, we think that we can really influence a senior buyer to buy our product. But let's be honest, they smell out. I think Josh Brown always called this commission breath. You're a seller. You just want to sell your product. Like, and let's be honest, that's the case, because people get count on selling as much as possible. So that's the behavior, which is quite logical. But if you want to do so, it's still fine, but you need to understand that there is an entire, and I call this, especially if you go to new markets, but also in your home market, the ecosystem surrounding you, customers, partners, and everyone who's already very close towards the buyer. And it can be like a former user of your product who's now employed at the company. It can be a consultancy, implementation partner, strategic partner, or a friend who works at a partner firm, but they are already a vendor towards your ideal customer. They can give you insights, intel, they can give you introductions, what have you. And so this entire ecosystem of partners And for me, what I found very important, because eventually it's not only the people who are close towards the buyer. Eventually, I think it's also very important that you build a strong brand. If you know your ICP, and your ICP is not the entire of the Netherlands for me. No, it's really specifically within, for instance, the Netherlands. If I'm in an industry, a really dedicated ICP, and that ICP, they gather online, offline at certain platforms, at certain occasions. And you need to understand, okay, there also, again, with your partners, building that trust layer, that credibility layer. If you are, and again, I always say like, scale the unscalable, but if you do that very well, you learn a lot because you have a lot of conversation with the market. So you get a lot of insight, which you can put in your marketing content. But on the other end, if I work with you and I have an ideal customer profile, and you can help me voice a very positive message about Koen and Personio, who do you think they will trust? Especially when they hear that from more people in their industry. So that ecosystem influence, I think that on itself is a very important play, just to eventually convert better in your markets, both from a new business and existing business perspective.
From my perspective, there are a couple of different kind of views here and perspectives and reasons why people believe this works. But from my perspective right now, one of the main drivers here is actually trust, which you kind of mentioned there previously. And this is not only about, not the person with the commission pressure is saying something positive, but someone who's actually using it, who doesn't have anything to win by saying this is good. Like that is more trust, by default. But the other main crucial thing here is, and this is maybe a little bit different for larger, more established players like Personio, there's just an avalanche of tools right now. And I can tell you, buyers are confused. They are absolutely confused, right? Kind of, we talked about AI and go-to-market and AI everywhere. And like, is it AI native? Is it SaaS and whatever? Buyers are so fundamentally confused. And what will happen in most cases is they will default back to, whom they trust. Like, I think that's what's going to happen. They're not going to sit there and try and do research. I tried to do research, actually, kind of, used, OpenAI and kind of did that stuff. And I had it, find me things. And you know what? Then, I scrolled around on LinkedIn and found a much better solution. And kind of that only, yes, artificial super intelligence is almost there. It does all the research, figures everything out, gives me all the information, but then it also doesn't. And then I'm like thinking, you know what? I can't even trust this thing now. Can't even. Maybe I should have never even thought about trusting it. But this, trying to navigate that is impossible apparently for AI. It's definitely impossible for you. So what will people do in this whole ecosystem now? To your point, I think they will default back to, taking, being okay with not necessarily buying the absolute best, perfect solution, top shelf, whatever, but going with the one where they trust the people behind it. And I think the only way for this to come out, sure, you can talk about the founder-led LinkedIn stuff. I think there's truth to that. But the other real thing is kind of to participate, actually not build, but participate in the ecosystem, where people can, have a chance to get to know you, get to trust you.
No, and it's 100% the case. And I think people really misunderstand that. Like, the digital marketing plays, they're fantastic. But if you really want to understand your specific buyers, if you want to gain trust, if you really want to understand how you can help them, and again, not only from a new business perspective, also still from an existing business perspective, your current customers are a true source of information where you can win your next customer. And that's also really a misunderstood play from a lot of founders and revenue leaders.
So let's jump. So we have like 3 more that we wanted to tick off, and
Yeah.
we're probably not going to get to this. So let's do the one that I think is most enticing, and you tell me the story about this. What is behind the process over people piece here, Koen? Tell us more about that.
Now, process over people is eventually a lot of companies, and a founder, if you are 1-2 mil or sub 5 mil, is you as a founder most likely are still really part of the new sales place. Like you actually, it's up to you that you still closes those big deals. But if I need to depend as a founder on myself, that's very risky. If I need to depend and I'm like sub 5 or sub 10 million on 1 or 2 really good superstars, which I have in my organization, it's very risky if that person is not longer there. for whatever reason, and let's be honest, the tenure is not that long in overall SaaS businesses or AI native businesses, they're all the same, I think, is so you need to start documenting. You need to understand that a process is like, hey, getting back towards what is all this type of, what is this ICP, which we've closed over and over again, reverse engineer how we found that customer, how we converted that customer, how we implemented and adopted that customer. These part of the processes over the entire customer journey, nowadays they are easier than ever to document and put it into a process. Because eventually I would really argue for anyone, any kind of customer conversation you have from tomorrow, record those conversations. Of course, you need to have consent from the customer, but all this information, how you've helped them, that you can put into your LLM. You can ask if it can document that part of the process. And if you have a new hire or whatever, you can actually explain how what good looks like towards Kevin Dorsey's focus. And I think these elements of documenting processes, and I know nobody likes it, no revenue leader, no founder. But nowadays with AI, it's so important to have all this information. You don't need to build all those playbooks. But if you record everything and you have all this data which you put into your LLM, your entire company, from marketing, from sales, from customer success, can benefit eventually from these kind of elements. And that's like one part of process over people. Another thing for me, process over people, is getting maybe back slightly towards like async selling, and that's for me cross-functional collaboration. So one of the key things when we want to go up market in this company, but also my previous company, is really making sure the entire customer-facing team, marketing, SDR, AE, solution engineer, partner manager, implementation manager, account manager, customer success, maybe even up to support, we need to understand this ICP. That's one thing. But also collectively, we are working together towards acquiring the right type of customer in a, let's call it ABM. We call it internally ABS, because eventually we want to sell. It's not only marketing, it's really a collective. But like what is this process of really focusing on this right A and B accounts, which we know convert the best? And I want eventually in my mid-funnel deal cycle or end-funnel deal cycle, before the customer initially signs, that my customer success can jump on a call or sends an email and explain, hey, dear customer, I know you're considering this and this solution. I just want to make sure the moment you sign up, this is the journey you will go through. This is actually how I've helped similar companies like yourself being very successful in the adoption and finding initial impact. And if the CSM helps cross-functional on the pre-sales side, or when it comes to handover, that they SE or the AE really helps landing that customer towards the implementation, that's cross-functional process on itself. That is really how you execute better. And again, these are the boring tactics, but I can tell you the last 3 years in the Benelux, how we grew quite significant in the Benelux is just because of those reasons. Async selling, cross-functional collaboration, really in one process, both on the new business side as on the existing business side, and then to the point, the ecosystem with events, community, and partners. They're a very boring place. They are not per se super scalable, but they really will help. They have helped us the last couple of years, and they will also be my focus place for next year. If you execute them well, if you document them well, they are becoming scalable, but definitely they become impactful in your organization to grow your revenue.
Yeah, absolutely. You know what? Let's wrap it here. Cool. I think this was a great episode. We kind of talked about what everyone immediately does when they think about next year and when they need to add more stuff. They immediately jump to, let's just, add more. Let's build the layer cake and so forth. But I think that, yes, there's some capital efficiency reasons, there are a couple of, complexity reasons, all kinds of reasons why that maybe is a bad idea. So instead, just try and figure out what actually works and try and triple, quadruple that instead, right? And how does that happen? Sure, it might happen with additional resource allocation. Nice, cool, very much a CFO play, do that. But also go down to the tactics and the operational layer here. Figure out how you can help in the sales process. Figure out how, in this case, you guys have identified there's something on the async side that we need to take care of. for people listening, this might be slightly different. There might be something else that's not working out, and kind of, you know, triple down on that potentially, right? I love the ecosystem play. I think the ecosystem play also works extremely well with your ICP, right? HR people, folks. I don't want to say that that's unique to them, but it fits totally, right?
No, but that's
then-
also how you look at it. What fits
Yes.
your specific
Yes.
ICP? Where are they gathering? What are they looking for?
And the thing is, right, kind of the, you know, one of the things that works is at least selling to, you know, C-level or enterprise folks, like intimate small events, kind of, you know, throw a dinner, have like a 10, 15 people thing, right? Kind of work on those things. And then the last piece, process over people. And there, you know, if I have one advice just to share right now, it's really, sometimes people think, yeah, sure, we should totally do that. And then think like, well, where should we start? And it's like, there's nothing really sticks out. Let's just keep going. Well, the places where you will see, you know, it happen is you onboard someone new, and then you basically, that new person will kind of reveal where your process sucks.
Yeah, 100%.
You know, it's that's what it is. It's a little bit, again, going back to the product comparison. If you onboard a new user, they will basically show you where the process breaks, right? And kind of, if you have a new fresh eyes on your process, that is a good moment to try and suss out where is there friction, and where do we need to use the sandpaper and kind of, you know, make this a bit smoother, right? Kind of think about it like this. Koen, thank you so much for today.
My pleasure.
You're becoming a regular on the show. You're kind of becoming a revenue formula contributor, I want to call you. Maybe you need to put this on your LinkedIn now. I don't know.
Sharing is caring. I think that's also one thing. Just by sharing what works for other revenue leaders, I think that's also a key play. Community again.
Yes.
Just to learn. You don't have to reinvent. You can really learn from others, and you need to know what you can and what you can't apply. Like, my tactics can maybe work in some industries and others not. Like, but you need to understand what can work for yourself. And I think that will really help you for next year on driving that additional 1, 10, 5, 10 million of ARR, which you need to find as a founder or a revenue leader. So happy to help.
That's it. Koen, thank you so much. Thank you everyone else for listening, and see you next week. Cheers.